So for years, I thought I just needed to control my relationship to food. I felt so out of control. And I thought if I was just more disciplined with food and knew how to control it, then I'd finally feel okay. I'd finally have the body I wanted. I'd finally feel confident and accepted. The truth is, the more I tried to control food, the more out of control I felt. And looking back on my journey, I didn't know I was an emotional eater. I can see the pieces coming together that when I was sad or I felt a certain way, I would go to food to soothe myself and, eat a box of cookies, but I didn't have a word for it. I'm an emotional eater. There was no terminology. I really just felt that something was wrong with my body, with my hunger, and that I was constantly hungry. The more I tried to control this behavior with diets and different things, the more out of control I felt. What finally helped me shift my emotional eating when I really put the pieces together didn't really have much to do with controlling food at all. And so before becoming a holistic nutritionist, I struggled with emotional eating. And I never really thought that I would be helping women with emotional eating. I actually, when I healed my emotional eating, which was before I became a holistic nutritionist, I was really inspired by food and how food felt in the body and how it made me feel when I finally had a healthy relationship to it. I could see the power of food in creating vibrancy and energy, and I loved that. And I thought I was going to become a holistic nutritionist to share that message, to take pretty pictures of food, to talk about the benefits of food, to help women make these changes, to see the power of food. But when I started working with clients, they struggle to make the changes I asked them to make because they have the same issue I did. They were struggling with emotional eating. They were using food to cope, to be a band-aid in their life, to soothe them in times of discomfort and stress. And so I knew I had to start talking about my own emotional eating struggles, even though it was really scary. And, I still felt like this was a shameful thing. Like, oh my God, I struggled with food. I was insecure, and it was I needed to now talk about that journey to help women. I couldn't just have this facade of I eat beautiful food and, it makes me feel amazing and it's so good for your hair and your skin. I had to go deeper because that's really the foundation that I needed to create for myself and that these women needed help with. Otherwise, I was going to do them a disservice by saying, you just need to make this change. And so part of being a holistic nutritionist, part of that journey was I started sharing what I did to resolve my emotional eating, the things that were different to what I learned in holistic nutrition school. I also went back and did a 2-year program in somatic psychotherapy because I was doing this work on myself, but I hadn't formally trained in it. And I wanted to give my clients this deeper work to help them shift their pattern. Going back to what was going on for me in my own journey with emotional eating is that on the outside, it probably looked like I was very ambitious and intelligent. I did really well in school. I was in chemistry and biological chemistry in university. I got a job as a chemist and I was going after my goals, and I was, eventually I went to teach in Korea, but that was part of my story of feeling out of control with food and my body. On the outside, it looked like I was going after these things, but on the inside, I felt a lot of shame, like something was wrong with me. Like, why can't I control food? Why can't I feel confident? Why can't I feel good about myself? And I thought if I changed everything, I would finally feel okay, because I reached this breaking point. Behind the scenes, I had, worked with a personal trainer. I was doing diets. I was in talk therapy. I eventually saw a chiropractor and a holistic nutritionist. And it wasn't just for these one-off sessions. I was putting in, almost 2 years in therapy. I signed like a 6-month, chiropractor package. And then I was seeing a holistic nutritionist for about a month or maybe a bit longer. I was seeing these practitioners for more than one session. And it didn't help me with my emotional eating because no one could tell me I was an emotional eater. And so I was telling them my struggle with food. I was telling them what was going on, but it was still happening. And so I reached this really big rock bottom where I realized that nothing was working to help me. And I thought if I changed everything in my life, I would finally, be able to just kind of recreate and reinvent myself and not have this issue. So I ended up leaving my job as a chemist and moved to Korea. I started teaching English, and I thought, new country, new language, new job, new me. But my emotional eating intensified. And so before this, shift and this rock bottom, I had spent years trying to fix my emotional eating through diets and nutrition, and seeing these different practitioners, trying harder, having more discipline, being really strict with myself. But no amount of these food rules or modalities they gave me helped me to resolve this pattern at the root. What eventually changed this pattern was that I had to start really digging into what I was experiencing. I started to really research my symptoms and what was happening to me. And I discovered I was an emotional eater, and it became so crystal clear. I had all the symptoms, and what I found was it wasn't that I was hungry all the time. I had emotional hunger and true hunger, and I just hadn't learned to discern that because the pattern was just it was just not obvious to me because I didn't have awareness of my body and what was really going on. And when I was in therapy, my therapist didn't point this out to me. She actually handed me a diet book. She would give me tips about eating, but we never got into this discernment level of true hunger, emotional hunger, how the patterns triggered, nothing like that. And so when I found this out, it was like this big aha. And so I started to put these pieces together. I started to put other pieces together. So, I'm triggered into this pattern. And I started to really just track when I was triggered and try to become aware of it. And then use those triggers to go deeper into the root. And I started experimenting with meditation, with going into the body, to trying to see what was really going on in that moment versus automatically going to food. And at first it was really difficult for me to do. I had to just notice I was doing it. And after I'd feel a lot of shame and feel really grossed out because I would just compulsively eat and I wouldn't be able to stop myself in the moment. And it wasn't until after I could reflect on it. But over time, I was able to reflect more and more and start seeing my pattern to know when it was going to happen. And I created more and more space where I could actually pause and go into the trigger and figure out what was going on. I was also intellectually learning about nutrition. And now that I knew when I was truly hungry, I was nourishing my body. I was moving away from diet mentality and forcing myself into a box, and realizing when I was really rigid with food and I had to eat a certain way, I felt a lot of shame, and that would also make me emotionally eat. And so I was just discerning and learning a lot about what was going on for me. The thing is that emotional eating is not about knowing what to eat. It's about really discerning when you're actually hungry from when you're emotionally hungry, and then knowing what to do for both of those. So a lot of emotional eating clients that I have, they want to be doing diets. They think something's wrong with their body. They're broken and they don't know how to actually nourish their body. And I'm not going to say just be intuitive about it. No, you need to actually learn about your body. And, that's something I started to practice as well. I started to learn, what does nourishment feel in my body? What does it look like to nourish your body, to satisfy hunger? And that is an art and science on its own. And that helps you stop binging when you're restricting, but it's not healing your emotional eating. That requires something separate. And then knowing what to do for both of those. So a lot of emotional eating clients that I have, they want to be doing diets. They think something's wrong with their body. They're broken and they don't know how to actually nourish their body. And I'm not going to say just be intuitive about it. No, you need to actually learn about your body. And, that's something I started to practice as well. I started to learn, what does nourishment feel in my body? What does it look like to nourish your body, to satisfy hunger? And that is an art and science on its own. And that helps you stop binging when you're restricting, but it's not healing your emotional eating. That requires something separate. Actually helped me resolve my emotional eating was really noticing that, softening my criticism, of myself and starting to see what this pattern was actually trying to do for me, help me cope with my emotions, help me cope with traumas, and to see when it was actually happening and going in deeper while nourishing my body, while accepting my body and seeing my body. Because sometimes, the way you feel and you look in the mirror, it triggers emotional eating as well, because whatever uncomfortable emotions would come up for me, or shame or guilt, I'd want to go to food to soothe that. And so I had to start looking at what were my triggers around that. And so through this process, this was me just doing this on my own, just learning about what worked for me, just step by step learning, this is emotional eating, how to nourish my body, what are my triggers. I didn't have words to name this, but I was creating emotional safety for myself. I was reparenting myself. I was doing somatic work in the body, resolving emotions and traumas, and really getting to the root of these triggers. And I was just experimenting and doing this, and could feel that it was working. And so I kept on doing it. I realized this actually works. This is getting to the root. When I do this process, I don't want to emotionally eat. I can see that I'm not hungry. I can see what I actually need to do. Do I need to have a boundary? Am I actually hungry? I could have all of these answers came to me internally. And so I had to learn to be with this discomfort and really start meeting my deeper needs. And so what's interesting is that when I became a holistic nutritionist, none of this was covered. Healing your emotional eating, it was not covered. What I had created wasn't part of the program, but I did learn a lot about food and the body. It reinforced what I already brought into the program. And I'm not saying that to, brag or anything like that. I did a lot of work on my own to create this. And it's through, the way I learn, I realize is like through a lot of trial and error. That's how I figure out my answers, my processes. And I did that before I went to holistic nutrition school. And I did that before I went into my somatic psychotherapy training. I worked on it on my own. I experimented, and that's what created it. I just went back to school to, have a more professional understanding. And that's just the way I realized I work best. I need to be in the experience of it. And I think that has a lot to do with me being a scientist, a chemist. I like to experiment. I like to see it works. I'm going to test it on myself and test it until I can feel it in my body. This is true. And that's what happened with me and this process. And so I realized that there's so many diets and there's so much information about food, but we need to have an embodied way of knowing what works for us. And we can have the principles of good nutrition and all of this, but we need to experiment in our body to see how our body reacts to this process, this information. Does it feel good for us? And that's what really creates that healing, especially the emotional work, that there's a shift. You're not just talking about it. You're actually doing the deeper work in the body. It's an embodied process. Looking back, that's the only thing that's going to really give you a clear answer. It has to feel good in your body. Not all the time, but you feel that click, that it's working, that it's moving through, because processing your emotions is not always comfortable, but you feel that it is working. Changing the way you're eating, you will notice how you feel. Does it feel good? Does this satisfy me? This is so important. It's the embodiment of this work. And it's getting in touch with your body that really starts shifting your emotional eating pattern. Obviously, there are steps to this, and this is what I teach to women inside of the Emotional Eating Evolution program, so that they can see so that they can feel their emotional eating shift. And honestly, this is why I created the Emotional Eating Evolution program, because I know how it feels to feel like confused and no one understands you, no one gets it. I had to create this for myself and to help the women that are struggling with this, that think they're broken or something's wrong with them, or, they just haven't figured it out, because there's so much information, so many diets, so many, quick fixes. I wanted them to have a tangible way that they could create sustainable change, so that they could stop constantly thinking about food and create more space in their life, that they would stop feeling at war with themselves, to stop feeling ashamed after eating, even if it's an appropriate amount, to stop falling into emotional eating spiral, to know that healing is possible. So if you're struggling with emotional eating right now, I would love to invite you To find out more about the Emotional Eating Evolution program, you can find out more at the link below. This is my 12-week container. It has the step-by-step process. It has support and guidance, one-to-one sessions with me, and the deeper work to help you shift your emotional eating so that you can start feeling at ease and peace around food and in your body in a sustainable way. And if you'd like a first step, I have a free guide called What Are You Truly Hungry For? This is the first step I give to clients, and it's one of the first steps I started practicing myself to resolve my emotional eating. So you can find the links below. And if you have any questions, please let me know. Please be sure to like and subscribe, and I look forward to sharing more with you, and I hope you have a great day.